Hey guys, tonight, we're heading into a hot, airless stone room filled with flickering candlelight, the thick smell of incense, and the very faint, persistent sound of a man coughing. Somewhere in the gloom lies a figure under layers of velvet sheets and stiff royal protocol. His name is Philip II of Spain, and he's been dying very, very slowly for what feels like forever. You're there too, in the corner, watching, maybe yawning a little. Try not to gag when the flies land. This is not the kind of palace where parties happen. The walls are heavy, the tapestries are somber, and the man in bed. He rules an empire so vast that the sun literally never sets on it. But tonight, he can't even reach the glass of water by his side without assistance. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I always love seeing who's falling asleep to 16th century royalty at 2 a.m. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You enter the room as slowly as the air seems to move. There's a hazy halo around each candle, and someone's muttering a prayer in Latin behind a curtain. This is Spain in 1598, and you've arrived in the sick room of a monarch who's been dragging his body through death's doorway, one crumbling organ at a time. The room isn't quiet, it's hushed. There's a difference. Quiet is peaceful. Hushed is what happens when everyone's too uncomfortable to speak. The man in the bed isn't just any old king. He's the most powerful Catholic ruler of his day, Philip II, the one who bankrolled the Inquisition, married into England, and wore black so often he might as well have invented Spanish Goth. But right now he's just another failing body in a room of nervous attendants. You shift your weight against the cold stone wall and take in the scene. There's something painfully ordinary about royal death. Despite the velvet curtains and gold-embroidered pillows, it's mostly sweat breath and that strange anticipation you feel when something big is happening very, very slowly. A priest dips his fingers in holy water. A servant swats at a fly with peacock feathers. You try not to trip over the ornate chamber pot someone forgot to empty. Historians still argue whether Philip's death dragged on for 53 days or 58. But everyone agrees it felt eternal. His body, stubborn and ceremonial to the end, refused to follow any schedule but its own. And let's talk about that body. Right now it's hidden under 3 layers of linen, but you can see the outline of his legs, one slightly thicker than the other, thanks to an infected ulcer. His hands tremble slightly. His fingers, once steady with a pen, now curl weakly against his side, like startled vines. The light flickers again. You catch a glimpse of a relic sitting on the bedside table, a small wooden cross wrapped in string, supposedly containing a fragment of the true cross. Or someone's idea of it. It smells faintly of frankincense and old wood. Quirky tidbit, Philip insisted on being surrounded by relics during his final days. Not just saints' bones, but bits of robes, dried flowers from holy sites. Even a feather he believed once touched St. Peter's tomb. He thought they'd help ease the soul's journey. You step a little closer. Not too close. The smell is strong. Not awful yet. But it's coming. The vinegar they use to clean the sheets can only mask so much. A low cough rises from the bed. Ragged. Wet. Like old paper, tearing in slow motion. The doctor, yes, there's always a doctor, leans in and adjusts a pillow with exaggerated gentleness. The gesture isn't for Philip. It's for everyone watching. A performance of comfort. The truth is, there's nothing left to do. The physicians have tried everything. Leeches, poultices, herbal broths. One even suggested powdered pearls, which sounded expensive and mostly useless. Another swore by garlic wine compresses. Nothing worked, and still the king lingers. This, you realize, is what dying looks like when no one dares to say the word. Someone clears their throat. A page opens a window just a crack and is immediately scolded. The protocol forbids drafts. They might confuse the spirit. You lean back against the stone and close your eyes for a moment. You've only been here an hour, but it already feels like days. You wonder how long the others have been watching. One servant near the bed hasn't blinked in 5 minutes. The candles burn lower. The room gets warmer. And Philip II, of Spain, continues to not die. Because kings apparently don't do anything quickly, not even this. You're still standing in the same room, but the air somehow feels heavier now, like each breath you take has to squeeze past centuries of royal anxiety. And maybe it does, because this isn't just a dying man, it's a dying system. A body built on control is beginning to fall apart. Philip II's entire life was about managing the unmanageable. He didn't just rule an empire, he tried to organize it, file it, index it, keep it all balanced in the same way a nervous host might keep a dinner party from collapsing by obsessively adjusting napkin angles. And now, for the first time, his body refuses to follow instructions. You glance back at the bed. He's still there. Of course he is, but the change is in the rhythm. His breaths don't arrive in neat symmetrical pairs anymore. One comes quickly, the next after a pause, then a longer pause, then 2 quick ones. It's a system in collapse. Historians often talk about Philip's passion for order, not just in politics or religion, but in everything. He arranged his books by language, then by topic, then by size. He annotated every margin. He edited notes sent to him before filing them. There's a reason his palace, the Escorial, looks like a spreadsheet made of granite. Every corridor, every arch, every room was designed with severe symmetry. No flourishes, no surprises, just walls that line up like soldiers, and staircases that dare not curve. Now imagine a man like that, losing control of his own fingers. A priest near the window shifts slightly, revealing a small writing desk in the corner. A letter rests open on it, half a reply to some provincial governor in Naples. The ink has dried. The pen is still wet. You wonder how many of these letters went unfinished. Or worse, how many Philip tried to dictate from bed, only for his words to slur or trail off. There's no line item in empire building for when your jaw locks up from fever. Still, the couriers come. Scrolls wrapped in red ribbons arrive daily. Some are placed gently on his bedside table. Others go unopened. A few are read aloud softly, in hopes that anything might earn a glance or a grunt. He used to make decisions. Now he makes only impressions. And that frightens the room. Because Philip, even in health, wasn't exactly a man of spontaneity. He didn't laugh in public. He didn't dance. He rarely smiled, unless a bishop had said something particularly orthodox. The idea that this cold, steady flame is sputtering, it makes everyone uneasy. You notice his hand again. It twitches slightly, as if reaching for a quill. Maybe it's muscle memory. Maybe he's dreaming of unfinished edicts. Or maybe somewhere in the fog of his mind, he still believes he can fix this, edit it. If he just gets one more draft. Quirky fact. Philip insisted on reviewing naval schedules down to the hour. Not the day. The hour. He once delayed a ship's departure because a particular saint's feast day struck him as more spiritually appropriate for travel. The ship sank anyway. Historians still argue whether his obsession with order made him a great ruler or a catastrophic micromanager. Some say it gave Spain stability. Others say it bogged down decisions until rebellions were fully baked before a reply arrived. And here's the irony. You can't help but smile at it gently as his world unravels. The only thing left is the silence between heartbeats. Another servant enters, carefully, like a librarian afraid of disturbing ancient scrolls. He checks the linens, adjusts a pillow, pulls the curtain just half an inch tighter. You hear the scrape of a chair leg on stone, a small echo. The priest coughs into his sleeve. The sound bounces off the vaulted ceiling like an apology. The king exhales, and for just a moment, just the smallest slice of time, you think that's it. The final breath. The conclusion of a life lived in straight lines and full paragraphs. But no, he inhales again. Ragged, shallow. He's not done yet. Because Philip II, King of Spain, Naples, Sicily, Portugal, and enough colonies to require a second map, isn't going to rush this. Not death. Not anything. If he's going to leave the world, he's going to do it slowly, methodically, and on parchment if possible. And so the room waits. The candles flicker. And you shift slightly on your feet, realizing this section of the story. This very slow unraveling is also the clearest mirror of who Philip truly was. A man who tried to write the world into submission. But now the ink is smudging. You shift your weight again, trying not to creak the floorboards. Though honestly, even the floor seems hesitant to interrupt. The room is still, not peaceful, but expectant, like a stage waiting for the final act to begin, or maybe end. And in the middle of it all, under layers of sweat-soaked linens and ceremonial silence, is the king sinking slowly, hour by hour, into a kind of sacred inertia. This is not an emergency. It's something stranger, a crisis so slow, it's been scheduled. You glance around the chamber. It's crowded, but no one dares move too quickly. The attendants hover. Some kneel. Some pray. Others simply stand with arms folded like sentries, keeping watch over their own unease. A few eyes are red-rimmed. One page boy might be asleep on his feet. The doctor, today's doctor anyway, leans in with the kind of quiet caution normally reserved for relics or high explosives. He touches the king's forehead, then whispers something to the nearest priest. You don't catch it. You're not meant to. There's no drama here, no sudden screaming. That would be unseemly, even dying. Philip maintains the pace of a man crossing a cathedral carefully, ritually, maybe with a script. You watch as a servant steps forward with a bundle of cloth. Not just any cloth, this one soaked in rose water and vinegar, a medieval attempt at masking the body's protest. He gently lifts the sheet from Philip's legs. You avert your gaze instinctively. Everyone else does too. Historians agree that by this stage, Philip's ulcers had opened. And not just one or two. Dozens, some the size of coins, others larger, oozing, swelling, refusing to close. The kind of wounds that feel personal, like they're angry at being alive. But this is where it gets strange, because Philip wanted this. Not the pain, not the rot, but the proximity to suffering. He believed in it, believed it had value. That each breath of agony was a form of purification, a slow, sacred burning off of sin. That's why he refused opiates. No pain relief, no dulling of the experience, just prayer vinegar cloths and the sound of his own decay. The servant recovers the leg hands, trembling only slightly. Another servant offers him a small handful of crushed herbs to hold under his nose. Not for healing, just to keep from fainting. You glance at the ceiling. Vaulted stone arches. Candles mounted in iron sconces. Smoke curling upward like forgotten thoughts. And it hits you. The sick room is part chapel, part prison, cell, part theater, and everyone in it is playing a role they've rehearsed for years. You move toward the foot of the bed, where a young cleric is reciting psalms softly in Latin. His voice is barely more than a breath, but it fills the space like thread weaving through fabric. You don't understand every word, but the cadence is clear, mourning wrapped in structure. And then there's the relics. So many relics. They crowd the nightstand, the shelves, even the corners of the room. Pieces of bone and crystal tubes, worn patches of cloth said to come from saints' robes, dried flowers from Jerusalem. A thorn as that thorn, from what someone insists, is the original crown. Quirky detail, Philip kept a personal inventory of every relic, cataloged, numbered, cross-referenced. If faith had a filing system, he built it. Historians still argue whether this was genuine piety or over-the-top anxiety. Did he truly believe each item brought him closer to God? Or did he fear what might happen if he didn't try everything? There's a story, half legend, half record, that one of the relics fell from its case during an earlier episode, landing with a sharp ping against the floor. Philip, even mid-fever, ordered it returned to its correct location immediately. His voice, they say, was hoarse but insistent. Even dying, he couldn't abide disorganization. You study his face now. Pale, shiny with sweat, skin pulled tight across his cheekbones like parchment stretched too thin. His eyes don't open anymore, not fully, but his mouth moves slightly. Maybe he's praying. Maybe he's editing his will one last time. Maybe both. He twitches again. A ripple under the sheets. The priest leans closer. Still no words, just murmured prayer. You can't help but think about the absurdity of this moment. An emperor of a global empire, surrounded by bones, blood-scented candles, and lavender-soaked bandages, breathing like a man who can't decide whether he's leaving or not. And no one in the room will tell him he can. Because here's the thing. This isn't just a death. It's a ritual. Every action, every breath, every application of oil, every whispered psalm. It's all part of the performance, a slow descent designed not for comfort, but for meaning. Philip would have wanted it this way, and so the attendants keep attending. The priests keep praying. And you wait. Because in this room, death doesn't arrive like a thief. It tiptoes in, waits its turn, and fills out the proper forms. The longer you stand in this room, the more you realize that Philip's dying isn't just slow, it's administrative. You can almost hear the paperwork rustling behind the veil of incense smoke. Even now, even here, nothing is spontaneous. Everything has a procedure. Look to the far wall. Do you see it? That desk. Large, plain oak, scratched in just the right places to look sacred. On top, a neat stack of scrolls bound in red and black ribbons, each one sealed, each one unopened, each one waiting for a reply that probably isn't coming. This is where the magic happened, where Philip ruled not with trumpets and speeches, but with quills and wax. His empire ran on notes, on instructions, on footnotes. You step closer and notice one parchment still unrolled, a letter from the Viceroy of Naples, perhaps, or a Jesuit missionary in Peru. It doesn't matter. The story is always the same, someone writes. Philip responds, eventually. Or he did. Now his responses are limited to twitches, to breaths, to the occasional whisper that might be Latin or might be the name of someone long dead. This is what it looks like when a man who lived by the pen loses the strength to lift it. You shift again your own limbs, feeling heavier by association. There's something exhausting about watching a man fight. Not to die, but to finish. As if his body is just the last page in a document that needs editing. Quirky detail. Philip's handwriting was infamous, tight slanted, and almost unreadable. Scholars still puzzle over some of his marginalia, unsure whether a phrase means send troops or send soup. That ambiguity has probably doomed at least one garrison and one cook. And yet he kept writing. Historians estimate that over the course of his reign, he personally reviewed hundreds of thousands of documents. Some say 1 million. Not dictated, reviewed, as in read, thought about, responded to, or scribbled on. No wonder his eyes look like they're permanently squinting into a candle. Now, even the candle's ahead of him. You turn back toward the bed where a servant is now dabbing the king's forehead with a cloth soaked in rosemary water. Not because it helps, just because it's what the routine says to do. Another priest enters. This one carries a letter from a far-off territory somewhere across the sea. You watch as he hesitates, then lays it on the table without a word. No one will read it tonight. Maybe not ever. And that's the real heartbreak. The system Philip built, the endless loop of ink and reply, is still moving, still sending, still reporting. But the center the reader is slipping. It's like watching a printing press keep stamping pages, even though the author's pen has fallen. You drift a little farther back now near the window. It's shuttered, of course. Can't let in drafts or flies. Though frankly, the flies seem to find their way in anyway. You feel the stone beneath your hand. Cool, smooth, steady. Like the world that Philip tried to build something unmoving, something eternal. But the truth is everything moves, even empires, and especially kings. There's a folktale whispered among the younger servants that Philip once tried to read a report about grain taxes during an earthquake, that while the walls shook, he simply kept writing, muttering about inaccurate harvest yields and how someone in Seville was clearly padding the numbers. Is it true? Who knows? Historians still debate whether this level of diligence was admirable or pathological. Was Philip ensuring his empire functioned at its best? Or was he afraid to not know something to let go of control, even for a second? Either way, here he is, letting go inch by inch, breath by breath. And around him the paperwork waits, not with urgency, not with hope, but with the same patience as the flies and the servants and the stones. It's all just waiting. You return to the foot of the bed. His chest rises once, then pauses, then rises again. You don't need to be a doctor to know what that means. But even now there's one more letter being opened, one more scroll being dusted, one more seal being cracked in the hallway. The work hasn't stopped just because the worker has. That's the legacy Philip II leaves behind. Not just an empire, but a rhythm, a system, a choreography of paper, ink, candlelight, and silence. And as you lean back against the wall, arms folded, watching the last clerk quietly adjust the edge of a scroll, you wonder if that's what he wanted. To be remembered not for battles, not for glory, but for being the man who read everything. There's a shift in the room. Not a dramatic one, just a quiet tightening of breath and posture. You recognize the signs. Something ceremonial is about to happen. The priests straighten their robes. A servant sets down the incense burner with a faint metallic clink. Someone begins humming a plain chant under their breath, the same way you might hum at a funeral without quite realizing it. It's time for a marriage, or at least a memory of one. Because if you're going to understand how this king ended up alone in a room filled with waxy saints and vinegar compresses, you'll need to rewind a little. Back through the letters, back through the ulcers, back to the vows. Philip II was married 4 times. Yes, 4, and while some people collect coins or rare birds, Philip collected queens. Not out of romance. Of course, this was 16th century royalty. Love was optional. Strategy was mandatory. His first wife, Maria Manuela of Portugal. His cousin. Yes, that kind of cousin. It was a dynastic match arranged while they were still basically children. Because what better way to preserve Habsburg bloodlines than to double down on them? Like it's a family recipe you're terrified of altering. The wedding was lavish painted ceilings, embroidered robes, golden goblets clinking to the sound of harpists. You're seated in one of the stiff-backed pews, now watching Philip nod his way through his vows, like he's confirming a shipment of barrels, not promising to love and cherish. He's young, pale, dutiful, the kind of groom who looks like he spent the morning proofreading the invitation. Maria is 15. She smiles a little, but it's the shy, distant smile of someone who knows her fate was sealed before she ever had a say. The two are married, and within a year, she's pregnant. Habsburg efficiency at its finest. But that joy is short-lived. Their son Don Carlos will grow up to be erratic, unstable, and the source of many denied royal headaches. And Maria. She dies 4 days after giving birth. Just like that. Historians still argue how much this shook Philip. Some say he withdrew further into prayer. Others believe it marked the beginning of a long, complicated relationship with grief. What's certain is that death would become his most consistent companion. You blink, and now you're at wedding number 2. Different chapel. Different queen. Same Philip. This time it's Queen Mary I of England, yes. That Mary, the one history nicknamed Bloody, for reasons that don't exactly set the mood for romance. Philip is 27. Mary is 37, desperate for a Catholic heir to secure England's spiritual future. The match is geopolitical, strategic, and profoundly awkward. You're there at Winchester Cathedral. It's raining. Naturally. The English courtiers look like they've swallowed lemon rinds. Philip doesn't speak English, and most of the English don't speak Spanish, but everyone's fluent in tension. They marry. There's no cheering. He tries it first, brings his own cooks, imports furniture, smiles a little. But he doesn't stay long. Spain needs him. Europe needs him. And Mary, well, Mary needs a miracle. She never gets one. No heir, no lasting union. Just a string of disappointments, stomach pains, and sad prayers. When she dies in 1558, Philip sends a letter. He does not attend the funeral. You wonder what that says about him about all of this. And then we move to the third marriage, Elizabeth of Valois, a French princess. 14 at the time of the betrothal, though the marriage isn't consummated until she's older. Philip is cautious, strangely so, and this time he seems different. She's charming, intelligent, kind. She laughs, and for once Philip does too. They walk together in gardens. They read poetry. She paints. He watches. For a time, life is softer. But if you've picked up on the pattern by now, you know where this is going. Elizabeth dies young, 23, after a miscarriage, and something in Philip folds. Not dramatically, just quietly, like a page dog-eared in a book no one finishes. Quirky fact. He kept her miniature portrait by his bed until the day he died. It's probably nearby right now, tucked somewhere behind a scroll of naval inventories or papal correspondence. You pause, just briefly, because that detail, that's the closest you get to a love story here. And finally, we arrive at wife number 4, Anna of Austria, his niece. Yes, again, the family tree doubles back on itself like a confused snake. She's devout, gentle, and impressively fertile. 5 children. One of them, the future Philip III. But Anna dies too. Childbirth. Again. And here's the part you're sitting with now. None of these women are in the room. Not one. The priests are here. The relics. The bureaucrats. Even the moldy heir. But no queens. Just memories of 4 marriages, 3 funerals, and a life so structured. Even love came with a seating chart. You stay a while longer at the edge of the bed, listening to the slow rhythm of Philip's breathing. Inhale, pause, exhale, and let the memory of those 4 queens fade gently into the stillness. They're gone now, reduced to portraits, mass cards, and ghostly mentions in the ledger of his life. But one of them left behind a name you've probably heard before. Don Carlos, Philip's firstborn son, his heir, his burden. And if this story weren't already weird enough, just wait. You step away from the bed and follow a side corridor in your mind's eye, through time more than space, until you find a much younger Philip. A newly widowed man, barely out of mourning, cradling a baby, who would one day make courtiers flinch and physicians whisper. Don Carlos was troubled. Historians still debate the cause. Was it genetics? Trauma, some consequence of inbreeding so tight it could fold laundry? No one agrees. But what they do agree on is that Don Carlos was unstable from the start. As a boy, he fell down a staircase and fractured his skull. The injury never fully healed. Afterward, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He was prone to violent outbursts, mood swings, dangerous impulses. There's even a story about him attempting to drown a servant for tying his shoes too tightly. You pause at the thought. Imagine that household. The silks and incense and gold, all hiding the sound of a prince screaming at shadows. And Philip, he didn't know what to do. You'd think with all his paperwork and planning, he'd have anticipated an heir going rogue. But no spreadsheet can fix madness. Quirky detail. Don Carlos once ordered the shoes of an entire convent removed and burned because he thought the nuns were plotting against him through footwear. Whether it actually happened or was court gossip. Well, let's say the odds are weirdly balanced. There's a legend half true, half paranoid, that Don Carlos plotted to flee Spain and start a rebellion. Philip found out. He had him arrested. His own son imprisoned in the Alcázar of Madrid, behind heavy wooden doors, fed through a slot like a dangerous animal. You picture it now, Carlos pacing in a dark chamber, muttering, clawing at the walls, screaming into stone. And outside, Philip. Solemn and still writing letters. Not to his son, of course. To the council. To Rome. To governors. The usual list. Because even when family ties snapped, the paperwork continued. Carlos died at 23. Thin, delirious. Some say starvation. Others suspect a quiet assassination, though Philip denied it to his grave. Historians still argue about that one. Was the boy murdered to protect the realm? Or did he collapse under the weight of a brain that betrayed him daily? Philip never spoke of him again. You return to the sick room where the air feels heavier now. Maybe it's the memory of Carlos, or maybe it's the smell. Something has turned in the heat. One of the bandages has slipped, revealing skin that's no longer entirely skin. A servant notices. He kneels, adjusts the cloth, says nothing. It's the quiet again. The kind of quiet that comes when a man's life is under audit and the ledger has too many scribbled out lines. You glance at the wall. There's a tapestry there, faded to the color of old tea. It shows a royal procession, Philip on horseback, Don Carlos just behind him. Both look serious. Both wear crowns. You wonder if that scene ever actually happened. Because the thing about royal tapestries is they don't show the truth. They show the intention, the illusion. And that's what Carlos became in the end, a symbol of everything Philip couldn't manage. His blood, his legacy, his failure wrapped in silk and shadow. Now look at Philip again. See how his lips twitch when he exhales. See the worry lines that remain even in unconsciousness. You wonder if he's dreaming about his son, or perhaps trying not to. In a strange, sad way, Carlos haunts the room more than any of the queens. No portraits remain near the bed, no relics, not even a locket. But the absence is its own kind of presence, and you can feel it now, like a cold draft where a door used to be. Because for all the order, all the scrolls and sermons and relics and protocols, Philip still outlived his heir. And that's not the kind of thing you file away. The candles are burning lower now. The smoke curls like threads of fading thought. And you notice how every little noise, the shuffle of feet, the turn of a page seems louder against the quiet. But there's a rhythm to it all. And that rhythm is prayer. A priest has stepped closer to the bed, murmuring Latin verses in a tone so soft, it feels like it's meant more for the dying man's soul than for any living ears. You lean in listening, catching words like peccata and miserere. Sins, mercy, the usual spiritual vocabulary of someone with a long resume and not much time left. Philip twitches barely, and you wonder what he's hearing. Is it the priest's words or something else? Is he listening for forgiveness or proofreading his own confessional thoughts? Because here's something you may not know. Philip wasn't just religious. He was soaked in faith. Every decision, every breath, every menu and military maneuver passed through the sieve of Scripture. He prayed constantly, obsessed over doctrine, kept a private confessor nearby at all times. And if you think that's normal for a 16th century king, sure, maybe it was. But Philip took it further. He didn't just ask if something was legal. He wanted to know if it was pleasing to God. He once delayed the approval of a building plan because he wasn't sure whether the chapel should face due east or just slightly northeast. Apparently, it depended on whether sunrise angles affected the sanctity of morning mass. That's the kind of detail that kept him up at night. You walk toward a side table and see what you assume is his personal prayer book. Bound in dark leather, the cover is worn smooth from fingers that traced every psalm like a map to heaven. Tucked between the pages is a folded note. You're not allowed to read it, but you do. It's written in that tight, slanted script, his script. A short list, a kind of spiritual to-do. Attend 3 more masses. Confess sins of pride. Delay and distraction. Pray for Anna. Fast again on Friday. No signatures, just the quiet guilt of a man who believed sanctity was a habit, not a moment. Historians still debate whether Philip's devotion was sincere or strategic. Was it a personal shield against regret, or a calculated projection of piety to keep his throne polished with divine favor? But as you look at him now, face ashen hands, barely visible beneath layers of cloth and saints' fragments, It's hard to imagine a man faking it. The guilt feels real. He confessed regularly, and not just the headline sins. He confessed everything. Impatience with his stewards, distrust in his advisors, a harsh word to a servant, the time he looked too long at a lavish tapestry and feared it might border on vanity. Quirky fact: he once wrote an entire letter asking whether the color of his drapes might offend God. The priest's reply was long extremely polite, and probably suppressed a sigh between each paragraph. You walk back toward the bed. Philip is still murmuring. His mouth barely moves, but the shape of the words is familiar. The Credo, the Nicene Creed. He knows it by heart. Of course he does. It's probably engraved in his teeth. The servant at his side lifts a small crucifix and places it gently in Philip's hand. His fingers don't close around it, but they twitch again like they remember how. The priest pauses, wipes the king's forehead, and whispers something too softly for even you to catch. But you don't need to hear it. You already know what it is. God is watching. And Philip wants him to take notes. You feel something odd stir in your chest. Not sympathy exactly, but a kind of quiet awe. Here is a man who built his world on discipline, who navigated grief, rebellion, plague, and bad airs by anchoring himself to liturgy. And now, even as his body sits and his mind blurs, the prayers keep coming. He's not asking for miracles, just process. Because for Philip, dying wasn't about drama. It was about preparation. The checklist. The order. Confess. Repent. Accept. Endure. And if there's time, edit the margins one last time. The candle beside his bed sputters, then steadies. Outside the window, bells ring softly, distant like a memory. Maybe for Vespers, maybe for someone else's death. But in here, the room breathes with ritual. And you bow your head. Because whether or not you share his beliefs, you can't help but admire the commitment. Even now, especially now, Philip is still trying to make everything just right for God. You catch it before anyone else does the shift in smell. It starts faint like the sourness of old parchment, or the edge of something left too long in a warm room. But then it deepens. Not just sweat, not just incense. There's something raw underneath it now, something wet and stubborn and wrunging. The others notice too. You can tell by how the servants breathe through their mouths, and how one of the younger attendants discreetly presses a handkerchief to his nose. No one says a word. Of course not. In a royal death chamber, even smells are subject to protocol. But make no mistake, Philip II is rotting. Still alive, still murmuring prayers, still receiving the occasional note or priestly blessing, but decaying nonetheless. It's not symbolic. It's physical. His skin has begun to break. The ulcers, once angry and inflamed, are now soft at the edges. Seeping. Collapsing. You step closer and see it one patch of cloth on the bed is darker than the rest. Not from dye, but from what it's soaked through with. You don't need to lift the sheet to imagine what's beneath it. Historians agree that by the final weeks of his life, Philip's body was in a state of semi-putrefaction. The official terms are gentle suppuration lesions, tissue compromise, but they all mean the same thing. The king's body has decided to start leaving before the soul does. A servant moves carefully around the bed, replacing soaked bandages with fresh ones, dipped in wine and herbs. It's more theater than cure. The scent of rosemary masks nothing now. Another servant brings out vinegar in a copper bowl and sets it by the foot of the bed. Not to clean, just to stand there and try. A physician leans in, whispers to the confessor, and makes the sign of the cross. You can't hear his words, but you catch one phrase on his lips: necrosis. You don't need a textbook to know what that means. You scan the rest of the room. The relics still sit where they were. The crucifix remains in Philip's limp hand. But something is changing. The sanctity of the space is cracking under the pressure of what's happening inside the king's flesh. And this is where the great contradiction of Philip's death begins to sing, because here lies the most powerful man of his age, commander of navy's definer of borders, protector of the faith, and no one can stop the simple, stubborn process of his skin turning against him. His sovereignty ends at the edge of a wound. He once ruled with proclamations. Now the smell speaks louder than any decree. Historians still argue whether this moment, this awareness of physical collapse, was known to Philip. Did he feel it? Did he understand it? Or was he too deep in fever and prayer to register that his body had begun its slow rebellion? You notice now how the bed linens have changed color. What was white is now off-white. What was off-white is now grayish-yellow, crusted at the edges. A fly buzzes once too close, and a servant swats it away, missing. And here's a fact that sounds made up, but isn't during these final days. The palace ordered fresh lavender to be burned alongside the incense, not because it helped, but because it made people feel like something was being done. One bishop reportedly took to carrying cloves in his sleeves to hold under his nose when entering the room. You spot him now, he's here tonight. Hands folded, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Every few minutes, he lifts a cloth to his face. Just for a second. Philip coughs again. Wet. From deep inside. The priest leans closer. A prayer. A blessing. A whispered line about forgiveness. But the air pushes back now. The room is no longer just filled with dying. It's being consumed by it. Quirky fact: Philip once believed certain holy texts could purify a space. He had psalms read aloud for hours when he suffered fevers in his youth, convinced that divine vibration would drive out illness. It didn't work then. It's not working now. You glance toward the window, still sealed. No air allowed in. Drafts are dangerous. Spirits, they say, can be carried away on them, but so can the stink. And the room is losing that battle. Philip stirs again. His fingers curl slightly. The crucifix shifts in his grasp. For a moment it looks like he's trying to hold tighter, but the strength isn't there. And in that second, something strikes you. He's not fighting the pain. He's managing it. Like a file. Like a line item in his final ledger. Something to be acknowledged, documented, and, if possible, contained. Just one more form of disorder to conquer before he lets go. You take a deep breath, instantly regretting it. And still, no one flinches. No one speaks of the smell. Because this is the king. And the protocol endures. You find yourself wondering how many doctors have walked through this room. Not just today, though you've already lost count, but across the span of Philip's long, crawling decline. The stream of physicians seems endless, each trailing a different philosophy and a pouch full of hopeful nonsense. The newest one enters now. He's short, nervous, and clutching a small satchel that smells aggressively of thyme and wet bark. He bows deeply unnecessarily. No one in the room is looking at him, except you. He's the latest chapter in an ongoing experiment. What will not work this time? He approaches the bed, carefully lifting the sleeve of his teal robe to cover his nose. He peeks at the king's arm. Winces. You don't blame him. Philip stirs, but doesn't wake. The physician pulls out a leather-bound notebook, flips through it with fingers that tremble just slightly. He consults a list of humor corrections, medieval medical speak for balancing the fluids that supposedly control health. Blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. You wonder which one's to blame for a rotting leg and a drifting mind. The doctor settles on a treatment, a poultice of mashed garlic honey, and something that might be crushed emerald. You're not sure whether it's medicine or salad dressing. He applies it with reverence, then steps back like a man waiting for a miracle or a lawsuit. Someone hands him a cloth. He wipes his hands slowly. Too slowly. He's stalling. You can feel it. Quirky fact, one of Philip's previous physicians once prescribed powdered toad skin as a cure for fevers. Another swore by holy soot scraped from cathedral chimneys during Lent. Philip endured it all without complaint, not because he believed it would work, but because he believed he was meant to suffer. Historians still debate whether this was masochism or martyrdom. Did he see illness as punishment, as purification, or as proof that even kings were accountable to higher, holier rules? The answer is probably yes to all. You move to the far side of the room, where a line of small wooden boxes rests on a table. Each box contains a different herbal preparation. One is labeled against swelling, another for heat of liver, a third simply says for bad spirits. You raise an eyebrow. The air in the room is thick with conflicting smells. Now, clove sweat, old linen rosemary, and underneath it all, something darker, fainter, like the underside of a bandage that's been left on too long. The doctor adds a new vial to the cluster of others on the bedside table. This one contains a mixture of myrrh and vinegar meant to cool the body and prepare the soul. You're not sure if it's medicine or ritual at this point. The king does not respond. Another priest enters, whispers a blessing. A clerk lingers behind him, clutching a slate. You catch a glimpse of it. A chart of treatments administered, prayers spoken, ointments applied. Every moment, even now, is being tracked. It's as if they're trying to out-document death itself. You glance at Philip again. His lips are dry and slightly parted. His brow slick with a sheen that's more oil than sweat. His hand has gone limp around the crucifix, and yet his eyelids flutter. Is he dreaming, hearing, counting the number of psalms still to be read? You don't know, but you suspect he does, because this man has always wanted to be present for everything, even the parts that hurt, especially the parts that prove he's still in control. Another doctor arrives. This one carries a pot of blessed balm, gifted by a noblewoman, who insists it once cured her horse. He opens the lid. Everyone leans back slightly. It smells like scorched fennel and regret. They apply it anyway. You close your eyes for a moment, trying to imagine another king in this situation, someone with fewer relics and more dignity. But then you open them again and realize that Philip wouldn't want it that way. To him, this suffering is the point. The slow collapse is a final act of faith. A living sermon on humility. The crown doesn't fall from his head with a clatter. It dissolves into gauze and incense. You turn toward the window still shut tight and catch your reflection in the glass. You look like part of the furniture now, a silent witness to a death choreographed like a mass. And still the doctors come. They rotate like monks, each bringing new hope and older herbs. One suggests removing another layer of linen. Another wants to try holy oil from Santiago. A third insists on reciting a litany during the next application. None of them disagree. That would imply someone might be wrong. But the truth unspoken and thick in the air is that this is a death that refuses to hurry. No cure, no shortcut. Just a long road through pain lined with well-meaning men and increasingly desperate remedies. And at the end of it, a king who knew the names of every bone in a saint's finger, but could not stop his own flesh from turning against him. You hear it before you see it, a low, persistent buzz, not from a voice, not from whispering priests or clinking goblets. It's a sound more organic, more invasive. A fly. It hovers near the edge of the curtain, testing the air with delicate insistence. It doesn't dart around wildly like a summer nuisance. It moves with purpose, with focus, like it knows there's something here for it, something ripe, something ready. You track it with your eyes, and you're not alone. A servant by the door stiffens, glances upward. Another reaches for the feather fan again, the one with peacock plumes that's been flapping lazily for hours. He waves it once half-heartedly. The fly doesn't care, because now there are 2, then 3, then, God help us, 6. They begin to circle the bed, slow and confident, like courtiers attending their own sickly monarch. This is their audience now. And the king, he doesn't even flinch. Historians don't like to talk about this part. The books get vague. They say he declined, or his health deteriorated. What they mean is Philip II of Spain, the most powerful man of his age, was being slowly eaten alive by the smallest guests in the room. His ulcers had opened long ago. Now they had become invitations. The tissue soft, wet, and helpless. The air so still, so warm, that the insects had no trouble finding their way in. And not just flies. There were maggots. You hesitate, don't you? The word lands heavy. Maggots. It's a word that doesn't sound like history. It sounds like horror. But here, it's just biology. Flesh rots. Insects arrive. And even the divine right of kings can't keep nature from clocking in. Quirky fact one chronicler noted rather delicately, that the king's sores offered such warmth and moisture that small things did breed therein. That's about as polite as it gets. Others weren't so cautious. There are accounts muted, scandalized, half-buried in archives that suggest servants had to remove handfuls of larvae from his legs each morning. You imagine the scene: a physician peeling back a linen wrap, revealing not just skin, but movement. Not just pus, but life. Crawling, pulsing, feeding, and still the priests kept praying. Still the letters arrived. Still the relics gleamed in their crystal casings, trying to outshine the smell. You wonder what Philip thought of it all, if he was aware, if he could feel it. Did he take it as a test of faith? A penance? Or had he already retreated so deeply into his own mind that the sensation of being devoured no longer reached him? Historians still debate whether the infestation was a result of medical missteps or simply an unavoidable outcome of prolonged, untreated ulcers in a hot, humid environment. Some argue the linens were changed too rarely. Others blame the sealed windows, the incense smoke, the lack of ventilation. But no one disputes that it happened, because the records mention it. The whispers repeat it. The room remembers. You take a small step backward now, not out of disgust, though it wouldn't be unreasonable, but out of reverence. There's something profoundly tragic about this moment. Not pathetic, not grotesque, just elemental. The empire was too big to manage, the crown too heavy to wear, and in the end, the only things small enough to get through the cracks were the ones without names or titles. You watch a fly land on the pillow near the king's temple. No one moves to brush it away. Maybe they're afraid to disturb him. Or maybe they've just accepted that this is how it ends. Not with a sword, not with a declaration, but with wings. You glance toward the far wall, where a gold leaf icon of Saint Sebastian hangs slightly crooked. His painted eyes seem to look past the whole scene, as if even the saints can't bear to witness this part. Another servant approaches, this one older. He carries a small jar of thick, dark resin, something sticky and pungent, meant to be dabbed around the ulcers to discourage further visitors. He kneels by the bed, dips 2 fingers into the jar, and applies the salve, gently muttering something under his breath. It doesn't work. You can already see a fly circling back. The priest beside him doesn't pause his prayer. You stand still. Breathe shallowly. Not because you're afraid, but because there's nothing else to do. This isn't a moment you intervene in. It's one you witness. And somehow amidst all this, the crawling, the buzzing, the rot, there's still a kind of dignity. Not because the setting is grand, not because the crown still gleams on a nearby cushion, but because Philip refuses to die quickly. He endures, minute by minute, inch by inch, even as his body becomes a kingdom for insects. No one speaks of it openly, but the tension in the room is beginning to shift. It's not hope. No one expects recovery now, but rather a subtle leaning in. The kind of focused stillness you see in a courtroom just before a verdict, or in a cathedral just after the last bell has tolled. Everyone is waiting. For what exactly is unclear, but the air knows something's coming. The insects are quieter now, oddly, still present, still buzzing in lazy spirals above the bed, but even they seem to sense the thickening stillness. It's as if the room has swallowed its own breath. Philip doesn't move. He hasn't in a while. His eyes remain half-lidded, the whites dulled by jaundice, his lips cracked and coated with the pale shine of holy oil. A relic rests near his chest. Someone's brought in a gilded box said to contain a fragment of St. Peter's sandal. It's placed reverently on a small embroidered pillow. The king does not respond, and yet despite all the silence, the room hums with activity. Whispered Latin, shuffling feet, scrolls being passed from one hand to another. A bishop leans in to examine the king's pulse, and though he's discreet, the action pulls every gaze in the room like a magnet. The bishop pulls back, shakes his head, slightly. Not yet. And so the process continues. One of the priests opens a heavy leather-bound tome and begins reciting again. This time, the Office of the Dead. A familiar series of prayers meant to usher a soul from one world into the next. You recognize the rhythm, gentle, steady, as if each phrase is a stepping stone across a dark river. The doctor wipes Philip's brow once more, not because it helps, but because it's what's done. Quirky detail. During this period, it was common for attendants to whisper final confessions into the ear of the dying on their behalf, in case the soul hadn't managed to do it personally. The idea was to leave nothing to chance. Better to overshare with heaven than underreport. So one of the confessors leans close now and murmurs a list of likely sins. Nothing scandalous, just the usual royal fare: impatience, pride, misplaced severity, perhaps a failure to attend Mass on 1 or 2 occasions. Though everyone knows that's unlikely, you wonder if the king hears any of it, if the words find their way through the fog, if they touch something in the brain that still understands guilt. Historians still argue whether Philip's relentless religiosity brought him peace or just structure. Did faith comfort him? Or did it give him a sense of rules he could never quite fulfill? You look at the crucifix in his hand, still there, though now more placed than held. His fingers have softened the flesh, grown waxy, the color leaving slowly. But no one says a word, because saying it would make it real. Instead, they speak in signs. The priest closes the prayer book. A servant refills the oil in the candle by the bedside. A clerk checks the list of final rites on a scrap of parchment and ticks one more box. You move to the side of the room and spot something strange. A long rod of silver leaning against the wall. A staff topped with a cross. It's the baculus, a ceremonial piece used to signal that the monarch is no longer issuing decrees. Once Philip dies, it will be broken, snapped in two and buried with him. It's not just symbolic, it's final. The ritual of kingship disassembled piece by piece. You feel the weight of that, of how even power is carefully deconstructed, not yanked away, folded. The candlelight flickers across the stone walls. The saints in the tapestries seem to lean forward. A fly crawls across the edge of a psalter, then takes off again. The silence deepens, and then a sound not from Philip, but from the back of the room. A bell. A small high chime rung once by a barefoot friar. It's the signal that the final prayers have begun. The commendatio animae. The commendation of the soul. You can feel it, can't you? The hush, thick as velvet. The careful, reverent dread that fills a room where everything is sacred and nothing is casual. Philip doesn't stir, but his chest still rises ever so slightly. Another prayer begins. Another drop of holy oil lands on his forehead. Another line from Scripture joins the air like a thread in a tapestry that's nearly complete. And through it all, the sound of insects, soft now almost respectful, as if they too have recognized that the room is changing, that something is approaching. Not quickly, but surely. You haven't moved for a long time now. No one has. The room has settled into the kind of stillness that doesn't come from exhaustion, but from reverence. Every gesture is careful. Every whisper is intentional. And in the center of it all, Philip remains suspended between two worlds, no longer entirely here, not quite gone. And still, the letters come. A page enters quietly, holding a scroll bound with a red ribbon. He doesn't hand it to Philip. He knows better. Instead, he places it on the ever-growing pile by the bedside next to three others from earlier today. One is stamped with the seal of the Viceroy of Mexico. Another bears the unmistakable ink of a report from the Spanish Netherlands. No one will open them. Not now. Probably not ever. But the Empire continues to write. That's the part you keep circling back to, the way Philip's world keeps humming, even as he fades. Ships set sail. Armies wait for orders. Bishops send requests. Bureaucrats submit updates. Somewhere in Peru, a governor is nervously penning a dispatch about missing silver shipments, not knowing that the man who would have underlined it in red ink won't ever see it. You look down at the nearest scroll. The wax seal is already cracked, likely opened by a clerk, hoping to summarize it before Philip lost the strength to read. A glance at the parchment reveals something almost poetic, Your Majesty. The roads are impassable, but we await your wisdom. You smile briefly at the irony. Historians still debate how much control Philip actually had over his empire during his final years. Was he still making decisions? Or had the wheels been spinning on momentum alone? Some argue that the machinery of government ran just fine without his direct input. Others claim every day without a signature sent ripples of chaos across oceans. Either way, the scrolls kept coming. You scan the shelves in the room and see them everywhere. Documents, notes, reports, petitions. Some bound in ribbon, others loose and curling at the edges. Piles like altars. towers of unread urgency. Even now the paper empire holds. There's a small inkwell on the desk, crusted at the top. The quill beside it hasn't moved in days, maybe weeks. You wonder if it was the last one he used, if it scratched out a final instruction, if anyone noticed that the line just stopped mid-sentence. Quirky fact. Philip sometimes wrote marginalia so tiny, so condensed, that only a handful of clerks could decipher it. They trained for years to read his personal shorthand. Some even carried small lenses to magnify the script. Imagine devoting your life to understanding a dying man's fading pen. You drift toward the window again, careful not to disturb the draft seals. Outside, the late summer sun hangs low. Shadows stretch across the palace courtyard like spilled ink. Somewhere in the Escorial, another bell rings, none of them loud. All of them layered like quiet reminders that time is passing and the king is not keeping up. You glance again at Philip. His mouth has slackened slightly. A drop of oil sits at the edge of his lip unmoved. His eyes are closed now fully. You're not sure when they did that. Maybe an hour ago. Maybe yesterday. But even if his body no longer rules, the documents do. This room is not just a sick room. It's a terminal office. And the work continues. One of the priests sets down a new scroll on the bedside table, this one without a seal. A list of masses scheduled to be said in Philip's name after his death. 42 to start. More to follow. Each one written in the same neat script, signed by a cardinal whose hands will probably tremble slightly as he reads the first benediction. The priest doesn't wait for approval. He simply nods to the others, who note the delivery, and file it with the others under a velvet cloth beside a piece of St. Ursula's spine. Everything has its place, even the unread. You turn back to the bed, and for the first time Philip looks peaceful. Not because the pain has stopped. It hasn't. But because something in the room has shifted. He is no longer the center of power. He is now its relic. And you get the sense he knew this would happen, that he designed it this way. He didn't want a dramatic death. He wanted a transition, a final paragraph, the footnote to a lifetime of underlining. Even his death is organized. Even this silence has a filing number. You hear the sound before you see the source, a soft shuffle, slow and deliberate, echoing off stone walls, sandals on flagstone. It's not a doctor, not a priest. This movement has weight, not just in step, but in meaning. You turn your head slightly and see the silhouette emerge from behind a velvet curtain. An old man, robed, hooded, eyes downcast. He does not bow. No one gasps. No one announces him. But everyone seems to know. You're watching a memory, because this man, stooped and slow and nearly ghost-like, doesn't belong to the present. He belongs to Philip's past. He is Charles V, Philip's father, the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, to be clear, Charles is long dead. He's not actually in the room. But something about the silence, the thick air, the near-death haze of incense and expectation, it pulls old ghosts from their corners. And in this moment, Charles might as well be standing beside the bed. The resemblance is uncanny. Both men built empires. Both men struggled with gout and melancholy. Both men eventually withdrew from the world, not in disgrace, but in design. Charles famously abdicated, voluntarily. He handed over the empire to Philip in a series of carefully staged ceremonies that spanned months. Years, if you count the emotional preparation. He didn't die with a crown on his head. He set it down one piece at a time and retired to a monastery in Yuste to grow oranges, pray often and somewhat ironically, continue micromanaging politics via letter. Quirky detail. Charles brought with him an organ, a massive mechanical clock, and his favorite paintings when he moved to Eusta. Retirement, but make it imperial. You can still feel his presence in Philip's bones, the need to control, the chronic solemnity, the guilt. Because Charles didn't just give Philip a throne, he gave him a burden. Historians still argue about whether Philip lived in admiration of his father or in fear of never measuring up. There are letters, stiff, formal, painfully polite, that suggest both. Charles would offer advice. Philip would reply with meticulous updates. Every line reads like a son, trying not to disappoint a man who never quite smiled. And now in this quiet room you can almost hear that same pressure weighing on the dying king. The need to finish well, to die correctly, to suffer with dignity like Charles did. Because yes, Charles suffered too. When his health declined, he planned his own funeral. Not metaphorically. He had the service performed while he was still alive, attending it, in full, lying in a coffin, while monks chanted beside him. You imagine Philip hearing that story, rereading the letters, folding the parchment just so. Maybe that's why he built the Escorial, a monument not just to God, but to legacy, to his father, to the idea that death can be orderly if you just prepare hard enough. You glance at the bed again. Philip breathes just barely. A small hitch, a faint wheeze. He is not yet the memory his father became, but he's closer now than ever before. A servant enters with a fresh cloth. This one is embroidered not with royal insignia, but with a small cross and a date. 21 September 1558. Charles's death. The cloth isn't practical. It's symbolic. Philip asked for it, because in his final hours, he wanted to be surrounded by reminders, not of triumph, but of succession, of endurance, of how death is not a rupture, but a ritual. You watch as the servant lays the cloth near the foot of the bed. No one explains. No one needs to. The legacy has come full circle. Another priest reads softly from a book of meditations Charles favored. The words echo not because they're loud, but because the room leans toward them, like plants chasing light. And for a moment you understand what Philip's been trying to do all along. He wasn't just trying to die well. He was trying to die right, in the same rhythm, the same posture, the same whispered cadence as the man who handed him the world. The ghost lingers a little longer at the bedside. No one speaks to it. But somehow it feels as though Philip knows he's there, and maybe that's enough. You linger near the doorway now, just far enough to watch everything unfold, but close enough to feel the room breathe. Or maybe it's just exhale. Because what's happening now isn't a death rattle. It's a slow unpacking. A king letting go, layer by layer, responsibility by responsibility. But in the silence between breaths, you realize there's one more thing clinging to the edge of this ceremony. Regret. It's not spoken, not written on parchment, not sealed with wax, but it hangs in the air as thick as the incense. Regret in this room is invisible and everywhere. Philip ruled for over 40 years. He oversaw the vast expansion of a global empire. He sent armies across Europe. He financed religious wars. He watched England slip through his fingers, saw the Spanish Armada swallowed by storms, and outlived almost everyone he loved. And now, as his body folds inward, his mind is reaching outward. You can feel it. Because here's the thing about dying slowly, it gives you time. Time to rewatch every decision. Time to wonder which letter should have stayed unsent, which punishment went too far, which war could have been a conversation. There's a clerk in the room now, crouched at a desk in the corner. He's reviewing what appears to be the king's final codicils. Small adjustments to the will addenda clarifications. You strain to read them from afar, and catch a phrase that I failed to restore order in Flanders weighs upon me. Ah, there it is. The Netherlands. Philip's greatest political migraine. Historians still debate whether he ever truly understood the Dutch revolt, whether he saw it as a religious heresy, a tax rebellion, or just another administrative problem gone rogue. He sent governors. He sent troops. He sent the Duke of Alva, whose reputation for cruelty only added fuel to the fire, and the fire spread. By the time Philip realized how deep the revolt ran, it was too late. Protestantism had taken root. Independence was more than an idea, and Spain, for all its ships and silver, could not glue the pieces back together. You picture him now lying there, breath shallow, his empire still technically intact but fraying at the edges. South America restless. The Low Countries lost. Even his beloved Madrid full of whispers. Quirky fact: Philip once blamed bad architecture for political unrest. He believed that poorly designed public squares encouraged conspiracy. He funded renovations just to tighten civic space. That's how deeply he believed in the power of design to control behavior. But in the end, the world proved messier than blueprints. You look at his hands, what's left of them. One still curls around the crucifix. The other lies limp, palm up, like it's waiting to receive something. Forgiveness, applause, closure. No one gives it. A priest steps closer and begins reading a psalm of repentance. The words tumble softly like water over stones. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness. It's unclear if Philip hears, but the room does, because everyone here knows what's gone unspoken. The lives lost in battle, the heretics burned, the alliances failed, the friends exiled, the son locked away, and still he ruled. Still he believed. Not because it brought peace necessarily, but because he thought it was right. And now you feel the conflict lingering in his final silence. What if it wasn't a servant adjusts a tapestry, its fringe brushing the floor like a sigh? Another kneels to light a small candle near the icon of St. Augustine. You glance up and see a mosaic of the Last Judgment overhead. Golden-winged angels, grim-faced saints, fire curling in the corners like decorative gilt. It's not subtle. Neither was Philip. He didn't do half measures. He didn't dabble in compromise. He believed in right and wrong. Heaven and hell. Order and chaos. And for decades he acted on that belief with all the weight of crowns and crosses behind him. But here in this bed, surrounded by murmured prayers and flickering candles, you get the sense that belief is softer now. Not broken, just quieter. You step closer. Philip breathes in, then out, and you realize he's not asking to be forgiven. He's trying to forgive himself. The wax mask is ready. It rests on a velvet tray near the foot of the bed. Eyes closed, expression neutral, neither smiling nor grimacing. A perfect pale replica of a face that's not quite finished, dying yet. You glance at it and shiver slightly. Not because it's eerie, though it is, but because it's so methodical, so expected. This is how you preserve power. One layer at a time. The mask was made days ago. Not after death, but during. Sculpted from wax and pigment, while Philip still breathed, because royal image waits for no one. His physicians took careful notes on the curve of his nose, the shape of his lips, the precise tint of the skin, not too pale, not too ruddy. Accuracy was essential. Posterity required perfection. Quirky fact, death masks weren't just souvenirs. They were used to design tomb sculptures, inform painters, and occasionally remind future rulers of the gravity of the job. "See this," they said. "This is how kings end. Study it." You approach the mask now. Its eyelids are gently domed, sculpted in a way that suggests peace. But you've seen Philip's real face. You've heard the coughing, seen the twitching. Peace has not arrived yet. The mask lies. Or maybe it predicts. Historians still argue whether Philip intended the Escorial to be his own stage-managed afterlife. Everything in this place seems built not just for function, but for symbol. The corridors, the relics, the tomb chamber directly beneath the chapel. It's all choreography. A final performance complete with props. You step back as one of the clerks enters, carrying a fresh scroll, this one sealed in black wax. It's not for Philip. It's about Philip. A pre-written obituary, no doubt. Or maybe the official announcement to be sent to the capitals of Europe the moment the last breath leaves his body. Even the words of his death were prepared in advance. There's a kind of brilliance to it, you think. A kind of exhaustion, too. Another servant crosses the room with a white linen shroud embroidered in silver thread. It will be used to wrap the body, but not yet. The priest gives him a nod, and he steps back. The ritual says wait. Everything in this room waits. You notice something small, almost hidden, tucked behind the candle tray. A tiny silver spoon, barely longer than your finger, used to place fragments of blessed bread or drops of wine onto the lips of the dying. If the lips can still part, the spoon hasn't been used yet. Philip's jaw is slack, but his throat still moves occasionally. Reflex, or no one knows. But it's enough to delay the final sacraments. The priest checks his watch. Not a modern timepiece, but a small sundial and compass combination passed down through generations of clergy. He tilts it toward the candlelight. Nods once. It is by ancient reckoning the hour of watching. You step toward the foot of the bed, where the velvet cushion still holds the royal regalia, a crown not too ornate, its gold dulled slightly with age. A scepter simple, inlaid with pearls. And the baculus the staff that will be broken once he dies. Symbolism stacked on symbolism. No action left unplanned. And yet, he still hasn't gone. You look at Philip. His body is rigid now. The breath comes shallow. His eyelids flutter once, twice. His fingers twitch. He may be seeing someone. You'll never know. But even as the priest raises the crucifix again, even as the choir outside begins to chant the Libera Me, there's a sliver of resistance in him, a quiet refusal to fully surrender, as if he knows there's still one more line to approve, one final detail to correct. You hear a servant whisper to another, "Is it time?" The second one shakes his head. Not yet. Because the wax mask may be ready, the scroll may be sealed, the linens may be folded, and waiting. But the king still breathes, and until he doesn't, the kingdom must wait with him. Because the ritual must be perfect, because Philip would want it that way, and because death, like all things in his reign, must follow protocol. You lose track of time in the way you do inside a cathedral on a rainy day, where the light never quite changes, and every sound is a hush wrapped in stone. The bed doesn't shift. The king doesn't move. But all around him, the machinery of legacy has begun to hum. It starts quietly, a scribe in the next room, making copies of the royal will. Not just one. Dozens. Each one identical, bound, and stamped to be sent across every corner of the empire. From Milan to Manila, people will soon read the same opening line. It has pleased God to call his servant Philip. You step to the table where one of the copies rests half-sealed. It's thick, too thick for a normal will. You skim the first few lines and spot a small detail. 612 clauses. Each one carefully written, ordered, cross-referenced. There are instructions for how many days of mourning must be observed in each province, how much cloth may be used for black armbands, who may speak at which mass, and how loudly. It's not a will, it's a manual. Because Philip isn't just dying, he's trying to manage his absence. A clerk reads aloud from Clause 419. The candles at El Escorial shall be lit continuously for 30 nights, and no fewer than 5 monks shall remain in prayer at any hour of the vigil. You glance toward the chapel corridor. You can already hear the monks' voices echoing from behind the stone. Gregorian chant, soft and hypnotic, like waves brushing the walls. Historians still debate whether Philip's obsession with ritual and planning made him more holy or just more haunted. Was this devotion or desperation in disguise? Quirky fact. There's a clause that forbids any mention of his name in royal prayers until his body is entombed. The idea was to delay even flattery until the bureaucracy was satisfied. You take another step toward the bed. Philip is barely breathing now, but the room is anything but still. A physician quietly checks his pulse. A bishop murmurs the apostolic blessing, the words so familiar now, they might as well be wallpaper. And just outside, horses are being saddled. Because the moment he dies, messengers must ride in every direction. It's all timed, all written. The death of a king is not an ending, it's a dispatch. You glance at a servant polishing the death regalia gloves, sash the narrow circlet to be placed on his brow during the lying in state. It's all been made ready. Each item is labeled, each movement rehearsed. And you just keep watching, because watching is all that's left to do. The wax mask remains nearby untouched for now, but its presence lingers quiet and certain. One of the monks enters to check on it, not to move it, just to make sure the velvet beneath hasn't wrinkled. Even the props receive reverence. Philip breathes again. Ragged, but there. The priest steps closer and lays his hand on the king's chest. Not to bless, not to press, just to feel. Then he withdraws, eyes shining with quiet calculation. Not yet. Everything is ready, but the king isn't finished. You walk the perimeter of the room, fingers trailing across the stone. It's smoother than you expected. Cold, yes, but softened by centuries of touch. You pause by the door and look back one more time. The man who once ruled the largest empire the world had ever seen now lies beneath 3 linen sheets, a gilded crucifix in one hand, and the weight of procedure in the other. And when he goes, there will be no outburst, no scream, just a long exhale and the sound of messengers mounting horses. You don't see it happen. No one really does. It slips in not like a thief or a storm, but like a final punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that's gone on just a little too long. One moment Philip breathes. The next, he doesn't. At first, there's doubt. The physician steps in with fingers poised, searching for a pulse that's no longer there. He leans closer, listens for breath. Nothing. He does not announce it. He simply nods, and everything changes. No one weeps. No one wails. This isn't that kind of death. It's ceremonial. 2 priests step forward in unison, their motions practiced identical. One closes the king's eyes. The other removes the crucifix from his hand, wiping it gently and placing it on the velvet tray beside the wax mask. The mask doesn't move, of course, but it feels like it's watching now. A bell tolls once in the corridor. A signal. Not loud, not frantic. Just clear. A single chime to say it has happened. And the room exhales. A servant folds back the upper sheet. Another begins to lay out the funeral garments, black velvet lined with ermine. A mantle of stiff brocade, heavy enough to silence wind. Someone places the narrow circlet on the king's head. It doesn't gleam. It absorbs the candlelight like memory. There's no chaos, no scramble. Just layers unfolding as planned. You step back, allowing them room. The bishop begins the subvenite, the first of the prayers for the departed. His voice is soft, but unwavering. The Latin flows like ink across parchment. May the angels lead thee into paradise. Historians still argue over the precise time of Philip's death. Some records say midnight, others say just before. But no matter the minute, the moment feels the same, the weight of a life folding in on itself quietly. Quirky fact, it was Philip's wish that in death his body be treated without extravagance. No gold crowns, no jeweled scepters, just simple black and solemn ritual. And yet even in his humility, the ritual itself has become grand. Because when a man like Philip dies, even simplicity turns to pageantry. A clerk steps forward and draws a line across a scroll. A symbolic gesture, the ledger of decisions now closed. Another writes his name in red ink on a different sheet, marking the beginning of official mourning. Yet another disappears out the door to inform the next rooms, the next officials, the next continent. Because the news must travel. Spain must know. Naples, Milan, Portugal, Flanders, Mexico, Peru. The Philippines named for him must be told. And they will be, by rider, by boat, by messenger with cracked leather boots and memorized phrases. El Rey Prudente has passed. Outside the chamber the palace shifts. Footsteps echo. Cloaks are donned. Pages sprint down corridors to inform the next in line. Not out of emotion, but duty. Inside the room, the first of the long candles is extinguished. One by one, the others follow. Only two remain burning near the altar at the foot of the bed. A monk kneels beside them, whispering a psalm. You move to the back of the chamber. No one notices. No one should. Because you've become part of the silence now. And what a silence it is. Not empty. Full. Of pages unturned. Of scrolls unopened. Of words he never got to write prayers. He almost finished decisions that will now fall to others. Less devout. Less careful. Less afraid. And still, the wax mask waits. A servant lifts it now and places it on a silk pillow beside the king's head. Not on the face. Not yet. Just near. The resemblance is uncanny, but you know better, because that mask, for all its detail, lacks the one thing that made Philip who he was in tension. That constant low-burning need to govern, to order, to suffer with purpose. The body has gone still, but for just a second the room feels like it's still waiting for him to speak, to underline one last word, to sign one final scroll. But he doesn't, because he can't, because he's gone. And now everything begins. You'd think after such a long, slow exit that the aftermath would feel like relief. But it doesn't. It feels like paperwork. Because now that Philip is gone, the real work begins, and no one knows that better than the men already reaching for fresh quills. The transition of power is not immediate, not ceremonially, at least. There are forms to complete, reports to draft. One clerk is already scribbling notes on the exact hour of death, while another cross-references the moment against astrological charts, as if heaven itself had a filing cabinet. Quirky fact, it was common in Philip's time to match royal deaths with cosmic signs. If the moon was waning, it was seen as a sign of divine resignation. If Venus was high, maybe a hopeful transition. Tonight, clouded skies. No omens visible, just candlelight and ink. Philip's body is still here, wrapped now in its burial shroud, the face covered at last with a fine veil. The wax mask has been removed, stored in a small lacquered box, to be delivered to the royal sculptor, who will begin the official funerary bust. Across the room, the baculus. The royal staff is broken. Not loudly, not ceremonially. Just snapped gently by a gloved hand, the pieces laid in two directions on a folded cloth. The scepter is set aside, the ring removed. These items will never be worn again. You glance toward the back of the chamber where a page waits, clutching a sealed packet marked, "To the Prince." That's Philip III now, his son. A young man already being dressed in mourning black in another wing of the palace, probably blinking against the realization that history just rearranged itself around him. He won't be crowned yet. First he must mourn, and the mourning is scheduled. 9 days of solemnity, each day marked by specific rites, psalm readings, masses, candle rituals. Then another 9 days of lesser mourning. Then the final transition to public ceremony. And beneath all of that, more scrolls, more notifications. Letters must go to Rome, to Vienna, to the papal nuncio, to governors and bishops and viceroys scattered across oceans. Riders are dispatched even now, some by candlelight, some by moonlight. No one waits for sunrise. It's for historians still argue whether Philip's death marked the true beginning of Spain's imperial decline. Some say yes, that without his obsessive grip, the machinery slowed. Others say the cracks were already there, hidden under velvet and incense, just waiting for the ritual to end. But no one argues about the scale of the moment. The king who ruled half the known world has passed, and the world must know. You watch as 2 servants enter with a wheeled bier shaped like a low gilded bed. They slide it beside the deathbed with reverent hands. The transition is gentle. A lift, a breath held, a body moved without protest. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, the bed is empty, and it looks strange like that. The impression of the body still lingers in the mattress, a damp outline, a sagging corner. But it's no longer royal. It's just linen. The bier rolls slowly toward the side door. A small procession forms. Priests, clerks, silent pages, no trumpets, no grand declarations, just footsteps. You follow, because how could you not? Down the corridor, through arches lined with paintings of other kings, some half-remembered, some barely worth footnotes. Philip's portrait hangs near the end, painted in better days. A younger face, sharp eyes, black robes. You wonder what he'd think if he saw it now. The chapel doors open. Low candles burn along the walls. A choir hums something ancient and spare, not quite music, more like memory pressed into sound. They set the bier before the altar, and then they leave. Not everyone, just most, because now begins the vigil. One priest kneels beside the body. A monk takes a place near the doorway, rosary in hand, lips already moving. The rest file out slowly, heads bowed, leaving only flickering light, and the sound of breath against stone. You linger a moment longer, not because there's more to see, but because after everything, after the scrolls and sores and masks and insects and whispered regrets, it feels wrong to turn away too quickly. This was the man who believed nothing should happen fast. So you don't. You stand still and let the silence settle around you like ash, because now the king has truly stopped, and the kingdom at last must learn how to move without him. It's the next morning now. The corridors are quieter somehow, not silent but dimmed. The usual clicks and echoes of court life have been replaced with soft steps and muffled voices. The air hangs heavy, not just with incense, but with awareness. Everyone who walks these halls knows something large has left them. You pass a line of servants standing with their heads bowed backs, straight hands clasped. They are not crying. Grief here has a uniform, and the first rule is contain it. In the antechamber just outside the chapel, you spot a table with black ribbons neatly arranged beside scrolls of mourning protocol. Each person entering takes one and pins it left. Shoulder 2 fingers from the collar. Precision matters. Philip would expect nothing less. Inside the body has not yet been interred. That comes later. For now, it lies in state. The bier stands on a raised platform, draped in black velvet with embroidered golden lions at the corners. Tall silver candlesticks flank either side. At the head, the crucifix. At the foot, an open book of Psalms, its pages turned to Psalm 90. Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations. You sit in the back, quiet among the few early mourners, allowed to enter. Bishops, secretaries, elders with tired eyes, and rings on every finger. One by one, they approach the bier. They kneel, cross themselves. Pause not long enough to be seen weeping, but long enough to be counted among the reverent. The wax mask is now placed atop the casket, not for viewing, for symbolism. A sign that the king, while gone, still watches, or perhaps that he's being watched. Quirky fact. Some royal death masks were kept for decades and used in ceremonies long after the ruler's passing. Philip's was reportedly stored in a velvet-lined cabinet only brought out on anniversaries and state occasions where solemnity needed a face. You glance at the clerks along the wall. They're already drafting new documents, proclamations, naming Philip III and his king letters to governors, budget revisions for the burial ceremony. No delay is permitted. The machine of monarchy continues. Historians still debate how much of Spain's identity was shaped by Philip II's death. Was it the end of absolute piety at the center of governance, or just the beginning of new, less personal bureaucracy? Either way, the shift is palpable. You step out for a moment into the courtyard. The sun is cool but bright. Stone corridors stretch in every direction, clean lines and shadowed arches intersecting like the inside of a clock. Here, outside the chapel, life continues. A page runs past with ink-stained fingers and a message to deliver. 2 guards murmur over new postings. A gardener dusts off a statue in the alcove, flicking cobwebs from a saint's halo. And yet you sense something under all that motion. A pause. Like the entire palace has taken a breath it hasn't released yet. You turn and walk slowly toward the Royal Archive wing. It's quieter there, always. Fewer feet, more scrolls. Rows and rows of memory recorded in ink and tucked into niches, each labeled with dates and seals. These halls are what Philip truly ruled. You pause at a shelf marked Personal Correspondence, 1571. Carefully labeled, tightly rolled. Some bound with ribbons so old they crumble when touched. You wonder how many of these he read, how many he responded to himself, how many were left waiting. You reach for one only to stop yourself, because something about it feels like an intrusion. So instead, you stand there and just listen. You can almost hear it. The sound of scratching quill, the rustle of parchment, the low murmurs of clerks comparing dates of secretaries debating phrasing, the faint echo of a man pacing slowly in a dim room, muttering corrections under his breath. Philip is gone, but his voice still lives here, in the files, in the routines, in the expectations. He may no longer sign the scrolls, but everyone still signs them like he's watching. Even now. Especially now. Because the habits of a king don't die with him. They linger. The mourning banners go up at midday, black cloth stitched with gold thread, unfurled from every visible window of the Escorial. They sway slightly in the breeze, less like flags, and more like veils drawn over the face of the building itself. You watch one catch the wind and shudder like the palace is exhaling through fabric. Inside, the mood has shifted again. The immediacy of death has passed. Now begins the long ritual of remembering. You return to the main chapel just as the first public mourners begin to enter. Nobles in black, advisors with solemn faces, women veiled, their lace combs tucked low. Some carry rosaries, others bring nothing but presents. All are here to witness what Philip left behind, not just in marble or manuscript, but in tone, in process, in how everything, every gesture, every flicker of a candle, every folded hand feels like it's still being done under his supervision. Even dead, he controls the mood. A boy enters with a tray of ink pots and quills. The guest book must be signed, a log of names, who came, how long they stayed, what prayers they whispered. The living organizing the grief of the dead. Quirky detail. Philip requested that those entering the mourning chapel remove any ornamentation in excess of spiritual humility. That included jewelry, feathers, and perfume. The scent of the room, as a result, is nothing but beeswax, incense, and stone. You stand near the archway and watch a nobleman kneel before the bier. His cloak pools around him like a shadow. He touches the edge of the casket just once, then rises. Nothing is said, but you feel it, the heaviness of legacy. Historians often focus on Philip's policies, his wars, his empire. But here now, in this moment, what you see most is his influence. Everyone here behaves as he taught them to, seriously, deliberately, cautiously. Even the children brought in for blessing seem quieter than usual, their eyes round as silver coins. A woman approaches the candle stand. She lights one, then another, then a third. Each for a different soul. One for Philip, one for Elizabeth, one perhaps for someone no one else remembers. She doesn't explain. She just lights them and bows. You move quietly around the room and notice a small group gathering near the side chapel where the relics are kept. They're not tourists. These are clergy and scholars quietly discussing which items should be displayed for the 9-day mourning period. Philip's favorite reliquary is already in place, a silver cross containing a thorn from the crown of Christ, or so it's claimed. It gleams dully in this candlelight, a reminder that even kings kneel to something. You wonder how many times Philip touched it, how many decisions he made with that relic in view. And now it watches over him, like a ledger closed with a cross instead of a wax seal. You step outside for air. The sun is high, but soft, late September's light, golden and thin. A few workers are already assembling the mourning platform that will carry the body from the Escorial to its final burial in the pantheon of kings. A stone staircase leads downward. You follow it. The temperature drops. The air becomes heavy with dust and the faint scent of iron and lilies. You pass through a narrow passage until you reach the burial vault. It is quiet, cool. The pantheon is not grand in the usual sense. It is circular symmetrical, clad in marble, but subdued. The tombs are stacked like drawers in a sanctified cabinet, each bearing a single name, a title, a year. You find the space prepared for Philip. It's not open yet, but the name is already carved. Philippus the Sancton. Hispaniarum Rex, King of the Spains. No epitaph, just a name and the echo of a lifetime spent trying to earn it. You sit on a nearby bench, stone hard cold, and you think about everything he tried to hold together. The church, the monarchy, the schedule. He didn't love easily. He didn't laugh often. But he believed, fiercely, devoutly, exhaustingly. And in the end, what he built was not just an empire, but an architecture of control. And now it's beginning to loosen. But not yet. For now, the tomb waits. And so do you. The funeral procession is days away, but preparations are already underway. Nothing like this happens quickly, not when it involves the king who timed his spiritual retreats down to the minute and reviewed candle counts like military supplies. You're standing now in the wardrobe hall, a long chamber lined with iron hooks and cedar chests, each one labeled with a name, a role, a rank. Garments for the pallbearers, robes for the monks, cloaks for the nobles who will walk behind the bier. It looks like a theater backstage, except every costume is black. Clerks pace slowly with tablets in hand, checking lists, noting who has arrived, who has been fitted, who is missing a hat of appropriate somberness. A tailor quietly adjusts a hemline. No one speaks above a whisper. You watch as a page folds a garment of black damask into a chest lined with velvet. It's embroidered not lavishly, but precisely. Just the royal arms stitched in thread, dark enough to vanish into the cloth, unless you squint. Philip would have approved. Quirky fact, funeral garments in the Spanish court were regulated down to fabric weight. Too light, and it was considered disrespectful. Mourning must feel heavy physically. You exit the wardrobe and follow the sound of hammering to the outer courtyard. There, carpenters are assembling the catafalque, the great raised platform that will support Philip's coffin during the funeral rites. It looks skeletal now, a scaffold of dark wood and iron brackets. But in days, it will be draped in black, trimmed with gold, and covered in flickering candles. One worker stands measuring the height of the frame with a long rod. Another marks it with chalk. Each element, height, width, angle is modeled after the design Philip selected years ago. Based, of course, on his father's. Historians still debate why Philip chose such stark, symmetrical forms for his funeral stage. Was it humility, severity, or a final statement of control? A life lived in straight lines must end on one. You look up. Above the courtyard, balconies fill with onlookers, servants, scribes, stable hands. Some whisper, others just watch. They've seen kings before, but none who ruled this long, none who ruled this way. Inside the palace, new documents are being copied. Announcements of mourning, decrees for public masses, notices to colonial viceroys outlining which flags must be lowered when bells should toll and how long black armbands must be worn. Even grief here comes with instructions. You slip into the chapel again. It's quiet now, emptier than before. The candles still burn, but lower. The body has been moved. The bier is gone. In its place stands only the velvet-covered platform where it rested. A faint indentation remains. One of the priests kneels alone in prayer. Another dusts the candle trays, careful not to spill the wax. You walk to the front of the altar and sit just for a moment on the cool marble step. There's no grand music, no hushed crowd, just the faint tap of a broom in the distance. And something settles over you. It's not awe. It's fatigue, the kind of soul weariness that comes from watching a man try to master death by rehearsal, from witnessing a kingdom respond to loss by ticking boxes. Because the truth is, no matter how many relics you arrange, how many scrolls you sign, how many hours you pray, or bandages you change, you cannot stage manage grief. You can only live through it. You can only kneel on the stone and listen to the silence, and remember that this too is history, not the kind carved into columns, but the kind that lingers in corners, in half-melted candles, in pages unsigned, in the slow hammering of a catafalque not yet ready. You rise brushing dust from your palms. It's time to see what comes next. Because Philip may be gone, but the procession, like the empire, must keep moving. The morning of the funeral arrives not with trumpets, but with the quiet shuffle of feet and the rustle of robes. The sun is still low, casting long golden stripes across the Escorial's courtyard. Mist curls around the base of the columns, rising like incense, offered to no one in particular. You're already awake. Most of the palace is. There is no sleeping late on a day like this. The great catafalque is finished now, draped in thick black velvet embroidered with gold thread that catches the morning light. At its center lies Philip's coffin, long, narrow, unadorned, save for the royal crest and a small ivory crucifix set at the head. It gleams gently, but only if you're close enough to see it. A hush falls over the crowd gathered in the square. Nobles, courtiers, guards, priests, servants, even stable boys and kitchen hands, all in black, all arranged by rank. Everything precisely placed, because this too is performance. Philip would have liked that. At the far end of the courtyard, a group of monks begins to chant. Low and deep, the sound rolls across the stone like a slow wave. The pallbearers chosen months ago from among the highest nobles step forward. Each one wears a heavy cloak, each face solemn. Not theatrical, just weighty. You watch as they lift the coffin, not quickly, not all at once. There is ceremony in the slowness, in the pause between breath and movement. And then step by step they begin. Down the corridor, into the chapel, through the nave. The organ plays now, not triumphant, not weeping, just steady, a kind of sonic scaffolding, because on this day, everything must hold together. You follow the procession trailing just behind the last dignitary. The corridor is lit with rows of candles, each flame protected by glass, flickering like a line of patient souls. Inside the chapel, the bier has been repositioned. The coffin is set upon it again, this time for the final rites. The black drapery behind the altar has been replaced with violet, the color of penitence. The Cardinal of Toledo begins the Mass. It is long, longer than most, because Philip asked for everything, every reading, every chant, every moment of silence prescribed in the Royal Liturgy Handbook. Nothing abbreviated, nothing skipped. Quirky detail. Philip once revised the court liturgy after noticing a single word had been omitted during a Vespers service. That word, unworthy. He insisted it be reinstated immediately. You sit now near the back of the chapel behind rows of veiled ladies, and somber-faced diplomats. No one shifts, no one coughs. The only movement is the rhythmic nodding of heads during prayer, the occasional glint of a tear quickly wiped with a lace handkerchief. Historians still debate whether Philip's funeral was truly grand or just exact. There were no fireworks, no parades, no elaborate masks or dramatics like in some Italian courts, but the weight of detail, the intent, was unmatched. This was not a farewell. It was a closing of ledgers, a final report. The priest lifts the host voice ringing clear through the stillness. He speaks not just to the chapel, but to history. May the soul of thy servant Philip, whom thou hast called from this world. The congregation answers softly, Lord, hear our prayer. The coffin is incensed, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Each motion slow, precise. Each puff of smoke rising straight into the rafters, joining dust and light. Then silence. A long one, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. Finally, the coffin is closed completely. No viewing, no final glimpse. Just anointed, blessed, and sealed. 2 guards approach with long staves tapping the floor in unison. The signal. It's time for the descent. The tomb lies below. The pantheon of kings. The air seems to hold its breath. The pallbearers lift again, and the procession turns. Down the steps, down into the cool stone belly of the Escorial. You follow, because you've come this far. And he is not finished yet. The descent into the pantheon is quiet, but weighty. Each step echoes longer than it should, like the palace itself is listening. The stone is polished to a mirror finish from centuries of ceremony, and your own reflection flickers beneath your feet, like a ghost trailing just behind you. You've reached the end of the procession, the final chapter of ritual. And it is as deliberate as all the rest. The stairs curve downward, spiraling into a circular chamber, the royal crypt. The air grows cooler, denser, lit only by iron sconces, their flames low steady. Ahead, the scent changes. Less incense now, more marble, more brass. The pantheon of the kings is not grand in the way that other royal tombs might be. There's no gaudy Baroque flourish, no murals of heaven, no triumphant allegories. Instead, there is symmetry, simplicity, a mathematical elegance that borders on sacred geometry. Philip chose this place, designed it really. He selected the exact type of stone black marble from the Basque region, insisted on the precise curvature of the dome. He even determined the order in which the sarcophagi would be arranged. Kings on one level, queens on another. No exceptions. And now the final space, his own, awaits. Historians still argue whether he planned this crypt as an act of humility or supremacy. Did he want to lie among his ancestors to demonstrate piety? Or did he intend to dominate the lineage even in death as the architect of his own eternity? You pause at the edge of the chamber. 12 stone niches line the walls, each holding a coffin in identical dimensions and finish. No names carved, just small plaques. Subtle, whispered identity. Carlos V. Charles V. His father is here, the first to be entombed. He rests across from the space now prepared for Philip. Symmetry, always symmetry. Quirky fact. Philip once delayed the interment of a royal cousin for over a year, citing architectural inconsistency in the prepared tomb. He demanded it be rebuilt 3 times until the walls aligned exactly with his specifications. A priest steps forward and opens a small silver vessel. Holy water. He sprinkles the path ahead. Another lifts the crucifix, and the coffin is borne forward one last time. No fanfare, no oration, just movement. The pallbearers step slowly toward the central alcove. Philip's place marked with a simple inscription on a brass plate, already polished to a dull glow. You watch as the coffin is lowered inch by inch onto the stone slab. No rope, no machinery, just hands and silence. And once it's in place, the bishop steps forward. He says just 5 words. Requiescat in pace. Philippus Rex. Let Philip the king rest in peace. The words are swallowed by the chamber, and you know it's done. The attendants step back. The monks begin a final hymn, not joyous, not grieving. A kind of vocal tide. You don't recognize the melody, but the weight of it fills the vault. You walk slowly around the perimeter, reading the names on each plaque. Queens, princes, monarchs whose stories have faded into dust. But this one, Philip's, is freshly etched, its letters still sharp. There's a small velvet-covered book placed on the coffin's corner. Not scripture. A ledger. The final volume of his court records, bound in black, closed with a gold clasp. You don't open it. No one will. It's not meant to be read, just remembered. You look around, at the flickering sconces, the perfect arcs of the ceiling, the hush that feels more like pause than silence. And you understand something. This isn't just a tomb. It's a filing cabinet for royalty, an archive of power, a library of bones. You step back, and the attendants close the gate. Not with a slam, with a latch. The kind of sound that doesn't echo, but settles. The procession turns. Heads bow. The climb begins. Back to the chapel. Back to light. Back to the world. But something of you remains here, because once you've seen a man buried in the home he built for his own death, you carry that image forever. A king in a box of his own design, resting exactly as planned. The climb back to the surface feels longer than the descent, not because of the steps, though there are many, but because of what you've left behind. Above you, the palace breathes again. The staff returns to their posts. The cooks light their hearths. The clerks refill their inkwells. The machine resumes. And yet something is changed. You pass a group of pages in the corridor, walking silently in a line, each holding a scroll. Orders from Philip III now. He is already signing things, appointing men, approving budgets. The ink is still wet, but the transition has begun. The crown didn't shatter when Philip died. It simply moved down the hallway. You enter the private oratory, a small stone chapel just off the royal quarters. This was Philip's retreat within a retreat, a room within the Escorial, where he prayed daily, sometimes hourly, a place of shadows and silence. You sit on the same narrow bench he used facing the same worn crucifix. Quirky fact. Philip had a small hatch built into the wall here. It connected directly to the main chapel, so that when ill he could open it and hear Mass without being seen. He once wrote, "Let not my sickness separate me from the word." You look at the hatch now. It's closed, and for the first time in decades it will stay that way. On the altar, someone has placed a small bouquet white lilies tied with black ribbon, a symbol of resurrection, or maybe just a gesture. Not everything needs an explanation. You glance up at the small oil painting above the altar. It shows St. Jerome in his study book's skull candle. A man of thought, of solitude. Philip admired Jerome deeply, modeled himself after him in many ways. You see the resemblance now more clearly than ever. You step outside the oratory and enter the long hallway of portraits. Each monarch hangs there, arranged in order, eyes gazing down the corridor as if watching the years pass. Philip's portrait has already been draped with a narrow black band across the corner, a sign of mourning. He looks different now. Not because the painting changed, but because you have. You know what's behind that face. The prayers, the paperwork, the ulcers, the flies, the whispered regrets, the empire held in ink-stained hands. Historians will spend centuries debating what kind of king he was. Brilliant obsessive, paralyzed by detail, or steady and deeply principled. Maybe all of it, maybe none, maybe something quieter. You pause before the portrait. Say nothing. The silence feels earned. A page walks past with a sealed envelope and a quill tucked behind one ear. He nods slightly, not to you, but to the room, as if to say, it continues. Because of course it does. That's what Philip built. An empire that breathes without him. A system so layered with documents and rituals and relics that his presence remains in every corner, even as his body rests below, in a vault of stone and symmetry. You pass through the corridor and out into the courtyard again. The sun is warmer now. A breeze moves through the cypress trees. Somewhere, a bell rings, not for death this time, but for lunch. Life in its quiet and different rhythm goes on. You sit on a bench near the fountain. The water is clear. The sound gentle. A pair of birds flutters nearby unconcerned. And you remember something Philip once said, that ruling was like building a dam to hold back chaos. That the moment you stopped reinforcing it, the water would find every crack. And yet he tried. Every day, every scroll, every mass, every breath, until the very last. Now, the dam belongs to someone else, and the water waits. The palace sleeps again. Not deeply, not innocently, but with the kind of sleep that follows ritual. The exhale after ceremony, after candles, after too many whispered prayers spoken just above a whisper. It's evening now. You walk the halls one last time, not because there's something left to see, but because there's something left to feel. The chamber where Philip died is closed now. The sheets stripped the relics, removed the incense, burned down to ash. A servant exits carrying a folded cloth. You glimpse the corner dark with something that isn't dye, and you look away. The door shuts behind her with a quiet finality. It's no longer a deathbed. Now, it's just a room. You move past the library, past the scriptoria, past the cloisters, where monks still hum verses under their breath. The pages in their hands look identical to the ones you saw days ago, but now they are dated differently. The corner bears a new seal, a new name. Philip III, but the handwriting still bears the rhythm of the father, because that's what lingers most of all. Not the crown, not the tomb, not even the thousands of prayers echoing through Spain's stone churches tonight. It's the rhythm, the pace of an empire that learned to move like its king, slowly, thoroughly, deliberately. A way of being. You pass a wall where a map once hung. The parchment is gone now, removed for updating. But you remember what it looked like. The old borders of a world stretched too wide. Red lines looping across oceans. Arrows through forests and mountain passes, all connected by paper, and willpower, and faith. Quirky fact. Philip's archives, once gathered at the Escorial, would eventually fill multiple buildings. Generations of clerks and scholars would comb through his documents, Some praised him as the mind that held an empire together. Others said he drowned in details and forgot how to breathe. Historians still argue, but none deny the sheer volume of it all. You walk out to the edge of the garden where a narrow stone path leads between hedges clipped to geometric perfection. You stop under an arch of ivy and look back at the palace. It doesn't glow. It looms. A quiet mountain of stone and silence and holy purpose. Philip is gone, and yet not. Because this place is him. Not just the tomb below, but the lines above. The shadows. The cold precision of its corridors. The way the light falls at an angle that feels chosen. He will not be remembered for laughter. Not for love. Not even perhaps for triumph. But for design. For insistence. For the refusal to let the world move without instruction. And as you sit on a cold stone bench, surrounded by trimmed hedges and rows of planted cypress, you feel the final breath of the story beginning to settle. It's time. Time to go. Time to leave the silence to itself. But before you do, you whisper something not to the palace, not to the king, not even to the crypt below, just to yourself. Something soft, something strange, something true. He tried, and that in the end might be all history ever asks of us. So now you're still here, breathing a little slower, eyes a little heavier, letting the weight of stone walls and candlelight and careful footsteps settle gently over your shoulders like a warm, worn cloak. The palace is quiet now, not in mourning, but in memory. And so are you. You've walked the corridors. You've watched the rituals unfold. You've stood beside kings and ghosts and soft-footed servants just trying not to spill the incense. And all along the way, time stretched, thickened, softened at the edges. That's the thing about stories like this. They don't shout. They whisper. They move like prayer, slow and deliberate. Not to startle, not to impress, but to hold you steady and gently. Lower the volume of the world outside. You've heard the bells toll. You've seen the scrolls passed from hand to hand. You've looked upon a crown, a wax mask, a locket with no breath behind it. And now it's just you. Sitting, breathing, still. So take this moment. Let the last of the candlelight flicker behind your eyes. Let the voices fade into walls. Let the weight of all that order so carefully maintained drift away like parchment ash. No more footsteps, no more scrolls. Just peace and quiet and the soft, steady hum of sleep. Sweet dreams.